Welcome back, everyone. It is time for another episode of the college football stock market here on Jackwagon Sports. Week 5 is in the books. We're looking ahead at week 6. So it's time once again to tell you the teams whose futures I'm buying into, I'm selling off my position, or I'm going to hold going forward based off of their past performances and looking ahead at what their schedule is in front of them. So let's go ahead and get into this week's episode of the college football stock market. Let's go ahead and we're going to start with looking at last week's picks and the teams I liked, sold off, and I held on to. So I bought the stock of Air Force and Kentucky. Both of those look very good. Jacksonville State as well. They had a bye week, and Washington State had a bye week as well. But still, four teams I'm very high on. Uh, Teams I sold off. The only regret I have here, actually, two, is Ole Miss and Texas Tech. Texas Tech with a backup quarterback looked very good at home against Houston. Ole Miss, of course, goes out and beats LSU at home. UCLA had a bye week, and Coastal Carolina lost again to Georgia Southern. Looking at the teams I held on were Syracuse and Florida. I wasn't too impressed with what they had in the past and looking to the future, and both of these teams lost this past week. So let's go ahead and look at some of who I'm going to buy, sell, and hold on this week. I got a fun one. The first one up is going to be Texas A&M. They sit at 4-1 right now. That one loss is on the road at Miami. It was 48-33. They've looked very good since, and my problem isn't with how they looked; it's what's ahead for them. They have Alabama coming to town this week. Then they go to Tennessee, home against South Carolina, and then they're at Ole Miss. They're with Max Johnson at quarterback right now. I'm not saying this team can't win a lot of these games or even any of these games, but just with how they played so far, I am kind of concerned. I mean, that loss to Miami looks better and better every week. Miami looks like a legitimate ACC threat right now, but with the 4 ranked opponents ahead on Texas A&M's schedule, makes me a little concerned. I think some people are starting to get hyped up behind them again. I see this as their floor right now. I have them at 7-5. I think that's the worst they can do, but I can also see them dropping another game or 2 here. And so with 7-5 being their floor, that's about where I see them at. I'm not saying that, they couldn't go out there and upset Ole Miss. They have LSU at the end of the season, who's looked very shaky. Who knows what they do with Alabama this weekend at home? But I'm just gonna hold on buying into the Texas A&M hype again. I've been let down plenty of times by them. So I'm just going to hold where I'm at right now, looking at what they have in front of them. Now, the team they played this past weekend was Arkansas, who they beat 34-30 or 34-22 in Jerry World, and that's actually a team I'm going to be selling on. Arkansas had a very high ceiling, I feel like, coming into this year. A lot of people were hyped up behind them, what they've done under Sam Pittman as their head coach, coming off a huge bowl win. And they've really struggled. They lost 3 straight games now. They're sitting here at 2-3. Those wins are not very impressive. One was over Kent State, who's one of the worst teams in college football right now, and they only beat them 28-6. Then they lose 2 of those games at home. Excuse me, 1 game at home, 1 neutral site, and then 1 on the road at LSU. And now you look ahead what they have coming up. It doesn't get any easier for them. They're at Ole Miss this weekend. Then they're at Alabama, home against Mississippi State, and then at Florida. I think they might miss a bowl game this year. I think 5-7 is this team's ceiling going forward. There's 2 or 3 winnable games ahead for them. Again, you're looking at 3 straight losses, and if you look at their offense and defense, the offense is only averaging 342 yards per game. I say only, that's actually pretty good, but the defense is giving up 339 yards per game. Defense, you can't have a balance like that. That's going to cost you a lot of games, as we've seen so far. Um, Again, I don't think Arkansas is looking at making a bowl game this season. Let's go ahead. Let's move on to some good news. A team I'm going to buy into, and that's going to be Maryland. And I think people are going to get upset with this because they're like, "Well, look at what Maryland has coming up. They got to go to Ohio State this weekend." But I really feel like this is a very good Maryland team. I'm not saying that they're going to go out there and beat Ohio State. I think they have a shot in the dark at it. Anything can happen up there. I think this is a very good Maryland team. They're 5-0 to start the season. First time they've been 5-0 since 2001. They played very good football to start the season. I think the worst Maryland does this season is they go 9-3. I think that's I think that's the worst Maryland can do. And those 3 losses I have are Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan towards the end of the year. And I said this before the season. I said this last year when Ohio State had to go to Maryland the week before they played Michigan. Maryland almost beat them. Maryland likes to play these big time opponents, except for Penn State. They can never really seem to. do anything with Penn State, but they always seem to play really well, especially that week. They always seem to get Michigan or Penn State or Michigan or Ohio State, excuse me, that week before the game, and it's always a trap game. Maryland likes to hang around in that. They could do the same thing with Michigan this year. But again, I think the worst Maryland can do right now is 9-3. I think that's exceptional um, for what Maryland has been the past few years. I don't think they're quite ready to compete for the Big Ten East or anything like that, but I'm very impressed with how Maryland has looked so far this season, and I'm excited to see where they go from here. I think this is going to be a really good game this weekend. I think it's an 18-point spread right now. I honestly think Maryland can cover that. Now, Maryland's defense, I don't think is on the same level as Ohio State, but Tagovailoa, Tua's little brother, has looked very good this season so far. They have five pretty solid wins. Two of those coming in conference, one on the road at Michigan State. But I'm excited to see where Maryland can go from here. And even if they don't necessarily play Ohio State close this weekend, again, 9-3 is the worst I see Maryland doing. Now that I say I'm probably jinxing them and they're going to lose 5 games or whatever, but I'm still very impressed with how Maryland's looked, and I think they have a bright future ahead of them. Um, let's go back and let's look at another team I'm going to be selling on, and that's going to be Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan had a lot of hype around them coming in this season. They won the Idaho Bowl. They were contending for the West championship in the MAC, and now to start the season, they're sitting at 2-3. They've lost some very tough games. They just lost to Central Michigan, who I think Eastern Michigan had the better roster on paper. I think this was a game Eastern Michigan absolutely should have won, and they go out and they lose by 3 on the road. You also look at some of these other results. They lost at Jacksonville State, a newcomer to the FBS. We talked about them last week when I bought into them, and that was the main reason why. And then they played UMass at home, and that was a close win. They only win that game 19-17. Their only other win is over Howard. So I'm not impressed with Eastern Michigan at all, really, to start the season. Then you look ahead. I think they play the 3 worst teams in the MAC, and great chance to play a lot better, get some confidence behind you. But you look at NIU; they just played Toledo, who I think is the best team in the MAC. They played them really close, gave them a scare. Kent State has been looking a little bit better each week. Not really impressed with Ball State, I think both of them are the second and third worst teams in all of the FBS right now. But Eastern Michigan just has not looked good. I don't think they're at the level where a lot of people thought they would be. Um, some people were picking them to win the MAC this season. I don't see that happening right now. I still think they can maybe fight and make a bowl game. I think 7-5 is their ceiling with how I'm looking at it right now. I think they drop 2 more games, and if they can win the rest of those games, they need to win 5 games, or essentially 4 games, excuse me. They need to win 4 games to be bowl eligible. Another thing a lot of people talk about coming into the season is Eastern Michigan had never won bowl games in back-to-back seasons, and this was the team that's going to do it. Well, they need to win 4 more games to get to that bowl first. I think they do it, but I don't think Eastern Michigan's competing to win the MAC like a lot of people had them coming into this season. Another team I'm going to be selling on is UCF. I think UCF, again, is a team that's fighting to make a bowl game. They just lost a very tough game at home to Baylor. They were up 35-7, and they end up losing that game 36-35. You look at some of their other games they've lost at Kansas State now, and their 2 wins on in their last 4 games. One was at Boise State. They won that game by 2 points, and the other one was home against FCS Villanova, 48-14. Then you got to look at what they have coming up. They're at Kansas, at Oklahoma, and then home against West Virginia. West Virginia's looked very good. I thought about buying into them this week, but they had a lot of injuries this past weekend on the defense. I just wasn't 100% sure. So I didn't include them in anything this week on this episode of College Football Stock Market. But and then after that, they're at Cincinnati. I really feel like UCF is going to fight scratch and claw to have to get 3 more wins. I'm not saying it's impossible. I have their ceiling again at 7-5, and I think that's the best they can do. But I feel like with how they looked the first couple of weeks, they went into that Kansas State game undefeated. Ever since then, it's kind of been downhill, and especially with blowing such a large lead against Baylor, I think this is just going to continue to be an uphill fight for UCF. Again, I think the best they do this year is 7-5, and I think getting those 2 extra wins, get that bowl eligibility, to get the 7 wins is gonna be difficult. So that's something I'm gonna be watching out for this season is if UCF can make the bowl game. They definitely have the roster to do it, but can they finish out these games and close out wins to be able to do that? Let's go ahead and look at the next team we're gonna talk about here. I'm gonna hold on USC. The last 2 weeks have really concerned me. It looked like their defense was getting better. They really struggled, the opening week, um, against San Jose State. Then they played Nevada, held them to 14 points, looked like they were taking a step forward. Then they go and play Stanford on the road, and they played Stanford at home. But again, defense took another step forward. Hey, maybe they got something figured out on the defensive side of the ball. Then they go to Arizona State, and they only win that game 42-28. Arizona State's offense has not looked very good in any game this season, and USC let them put up 28 points. Kind of hang around a lot later in that game than they should have. End up beating again, a very bad team by 2 touchdowns. Then you look at this past weekend at the during the Colorado game, they were up big in this game, and their defense made countless errors and mistakes, and they let Colorado climb back into that game. Colorado had an outside chance at making that comeback. They weren't able to get the onside kick, all that other stuff you can point at. But this defense, Caleb Williams is putting up ungodly numbers again this season. Looks like he's out there playing a video game, and he has it set to freaking rookie difficulty with the plays he's making. Their offense is fine. I'm not concerned about how USC's offense is playing. They kind of sputtered a little bit in the second half, but I credit that more to Colorado just being able to make a little bit better adjustments, especially I think with the shellacking they took the week before at Oregon. They learned how to adapt on the fly a lot better from situations that they hadn't been in up to that point. And the way that they were able to fight back and make this game a lot closer than what it looked like. Let's see what the score was. Yeah, USC was up 41-14. It was 48-21 towards the end of the third quarter. So at the start of the fourth quarter, it was 48-27. And Colorado was able to mount a comeback and then end up only losing 48-41. So this USC defense really, really concerns me, especially knowing Colorado's offensive flaws. And then you look at who USC has coming up. They're home against Arizona this week. Arizona's looked pretty good. I'm not saying that's an upset alert game, but I think Arizona can absolutely give them more trouble than what Arizona State did. Then you look, they have to go to Notre Dame, the home against Utah, and then at Cal. So they've already had their bye week. Their bye week's been burned, and they have a very tough road coming up ahead. And then you look even farther past that. They have Oregon on the road. They have Washington at home. This is not going to be an easy schedule for USC going forward. This is going to be an uphill battle, and if their defense can't make stops, can't get off the field, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And Caleb Williams can only do so much from the offensive side of the ball to help them win these games. They have the offensive roster to win a national title, but the defense is just so poor. I said this earlier in the season. I wouldn't be surprised if the defensive coordinator got fired midseason. I think he probably at least makes it the rest of the season, but this defense does not look good. They need to make some major schematic changes on the defensive side of the ball. They have great playmakers, but they're just I don't know what's going on. I can't sit here and confidently say, it's an alignment issue, so on and so forth. But there's definitely a major issue on the defensive side of the ball for Southern California. Let's go ahead and let's end on a high note here. This is the last team we're going to talk about, and it's UNLV. I don't think UNLV is getting talked about enough in the Mountain West. I don't think the Mountain West as a whole is getting talked about enough. There's 4 teams right now I am very high on. Boise State is looking better each week after a rough start to the season. The Mountain West is going to be fun to watch, so keep your eyes on this conference. This is great football being played by a lot of teams, and it's going to come down to the wire. UNLV's one loss so far this season was at number 2 Michigan, and just they covered the spread in that game. But since then, they've beaten Vanderbilt and then 2 conference opponents in UTEP and Hawaii. Um, you look at what they have coming up. They play Nevada, who is the worst team in college football right now. Then they're home against Colorado State, who's had their own struggles. Then it's going to be their big game and really the litmus test for how good this team is. They have to go to Fresno State, which I think is still right now the best team in the Mountain West. I think Air Force is number 2, and the sad part about that is, um, I I don't think those two will meet up until the conference championship game. Neither one of them were going to play in the regular season, but they still have their own tests coming up. And UNLV has to go to Fresno State. There you see October 28th, Halloween weekend. That's going to be a very fun game to watch. I'm excited to see that game. I think UNLV comes into that game 6-1, and Fresno State is most likely still undefeated at that point. And that's really going to set the bar for who is the best team in their division in the Mountain West. You know, you still have Air Force and Boise State coming up. That's kind of probably more than likely going to set the bar for their division. You also have Wyoming up there. Uh, Mountain West is just jam packed full of talent this year and good football teams, and they definitely deserve a lot more attention. And I'm excited to see how it plays out out west in the Mountain West. But it's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you guys are watching that football because it is good football. These are good football teams. I'm excited to see where it goes. That'll do it for this week's edition of the College Football Stock Market. As always, we thank you guys so much for checking us out. And then don't forget, tomorrow we will be releasing the College Football Awards. On Thursday morning, the Blitz Boys podcast will come out. And then Saturday, we are live with Out of the Tunnel. We're also working behind the scenes on some other announcements, and we hope to make those later this week. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. But thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you guys in the next video.